The DCEU is officially over. 10 years ago, 9-year-old me walked into the movies to watch Man of Steel, the start of the DC Extended Universe. Over the last 10 years, the DCEU has delivered some really great films and also some really bad films. But the final movie of the DCEU is now in theaters, which means for the final time, today I'm going to sit down to rank every single project in the DC Extended Universe. Before we get into it, let me know your ranking of all of the DCEU projects in the comments down below. Both are wasting any more time. Let's get into it. So as you can see on the tier list today, we have the tiers of bad, meh, good, great, and best of the best. And starting it off with the very beginning of this universe, we have Man of Steel. And sadly, this just goes into the good category. This is definitely going to end up on the lower side of good movies in this universe. And this kind of just signifies the universe as a whole. Obviously, it's coming to an end, but even from the very beginning, this universe wasn't that great. I think Man of Steel is just a pretty average outing for a comic book movie in general. And over time, I've enjoyed it more and more, but it's definitely, again, on that teeter line between good and meh. I think Cavill is a good enough Superman. Obviously, he looks like Superman, but this iteration of Superman never feels like the character to me. I think Zack Snyder just completely misunderstands this character as well as a bunch of others that he had his hands on. But next up on the list, we have Wonder Woman, and I'm going to actually put this in great. I think Wonder Woman is actually a really great film. I think Patty Jenkins takes the right elements of what Zack Snyder did in his Josstice League type of Wonder Woman, BVS type of Wonder Woman, but actually gives her some emotional element to it that we can connect to as an audience, whereas Superman just feels so far out there. Obviously, he's trying to be seen as a god, but so is Wonder Woman, yet she still has characteristics that we can resonate with her with. I think there's a lot to love about this movie, but also, I think the third act kind of gets out of hand. I think the whole Hades storyline is really interesting for a while, but then it kind of just dilutes into this messy, over-the-top CGI final battle, which, again, makes sense because this is a story about gods, but I think the first two acts were so personal, and that really worked for me, that the final act just got too out there. Next up, we have Wonder Woman 1984, and this is definitely going in the bad category. I was genuinely so excited for this film. As you guys can tell, I really like the original Wonder Woman movie, but this one showcases the bad side of Gal Gadot's minimal acting skills, and it's just over convoluted with villains. There's two villains, both of which just aren't really that interesting. I think if you do two villains and even one of them is interesting, it'll work. But here, nothing really falls together. I think Wonder Woman herself this time is just really, really weird. I think Steve Trevor's return doesn't really work. This just felt like an overcomplicated version of the first film that also felt so dissociated with the Wonder Woman that was in the first movie. It just feels like a completely different character in my opinion. And then we have Black Adam, and I'm not gonna lie, I kind of like this movie. I'm going to put it at the top of good. I think this will go down as the list goes on, but I still really enjoy Black Adam. You know when you say a movie just absolutely this is that type of movie. This movie goes so hard. The soundtrack is so fun. It is just such a saucy film. Again, not a really just awesome, amazing film, but it's a great time. Again, fair warning, this will probably go down as the tier list continues because as you guys can tell, I do rank them within the tiers themselves, but for now, I really, really like Black Adam. I think they do a decent job with the JSA, The Rock. He's a big rooting force, and he plays like the same character in every single movie, but it kind of works this time because that's exactly what his character is supposed to be, so I kind of like it. The lore is really, really great. I really just love the way that they piece together the different parts of this universe, and one of my favorite things about the DCEU in general is that their films truly feel like they're ripped out of the pages of a comic book, and this movie is the definition of that. This feels like it is ripped right, just torn from the pages. This, along with many of the recent films, just go all in on the comic bookiness of them, and I think that works to its advantage. And then we have Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, and this one is going in meh, and while we're at this movie, we'll go to the Ultimate Edition, which I will put actually at the very top of good. Okay, so here's my thing. Batman v Superman itself, not a great film. And I think the Ultimate Edition is better, but not by that much. So I think BVS in general is just a very overconvoluted movie. Does not need to be a movie that was made. I think you just do a solo Batman movie and then maybe Batman v Superman. But introducing Batman into a world that already has Superman without giving him a solo movie just makes everything feel so overcomplicated. I think BVS Ultimate Edition works just because it doesn't feel as as tight, and my biggest problem is that the whole universe in this beginning stages of it felt so tight. So Ultimate Edition carries it out just a little bit more, but in general, the good and meh tiers are very, very close to one another, because even though these three movies are in good, they are not like perfect, like 7 out of 10, like high average films. They're definitely on the lower end, like 6.5 in my opinion. But nevertheless, I enjoy some aspects of both of these movies. I haven't seen the regular version in a while. I keep rewatching the Ultimate Edition because, again, that's just the better one. But I think the elements of Lex Luthor really work. My biggest problem just comes in with this iteration of Batman. I just don't really like that Batman kills in the way that he does. I don't like the way that they go about portraying the differences between Batman and Superman. I don't like the portrayal of Superman in general. It's just core problems with the characterizations of these characters that I feel is just misdone, and that's what leads me to not liking these movies. And then we have Aquaman. Now, in terms of the best DC Universe movies, I'm going to put this at best of the best. I think this movie absolutely rips. I think the underwater sequences are so much fun. The trench sequence is absolutely mind-blowingly amazing. I think Jason Momoa has this unlimited charisma about him. I love just this King of Atlantis story of just reclaiming the throne. I know it's overdone, you know, Lion King, Black Panther. I get it, you know, I get that story is overdone. But when it's done right, it's good. It's great. And I think Aquaman does an amazing job with that. I think there's also a great flair of it being like, obviously a James Wan production. Like, you get those elements of James Wan in there, but it also just feels like a regular comic book movie. You know what I mean? Like, there is sauce within the film, but it's not over saucy. It's not too much to where it becomes cliche or annoying. I think all of the side elements in this movie are also great. One thing I love about at least the Aquaman series is how well they world build, because Atlantis, as well as the other 6 kingdoms which are in the first movie, I think they are all absolutely perfectly done. I think it's just the transition between the land and the water stuff that creates for an interesting story. You know, this half-blood that's trying to become the king, that is an interesting story. And then when you pair it with very cool visuals, amazing action sequences, and just a great quest, I think it works. I'll get to talking about Manta in the Lost Kingdom in just a second here, but I think in this movie, he is pretty much perfectly executed, and I think the setup is just amazing. But next up is Aquaman, the Lost Kingdom. I'm gonna put this at the very top of good. I don't think this is near on par with the first Aquaman movie, and the main reason for that is just because I feel like, yes, it takes the amazing elements of the first film, but I think the lows of this movie are way lower than the first film. I don't want to just sit here and compare it to the first film, so I do think just in general, this movie does a lot of great things. My favorite thing about this movie is just how it's another great quest. You know, it's another quest that feels earned. It feels like there is a story to tell with this character, and that's the story that they do tell. I don't want to get into any spoilers, but if you've been on Twitter, you probably know what type of story they're adapting, what storyline. You know, it has to do with Aquaman's bloodline. Obviously, his son and his brother are also involved. There is a lot going on here for Aquaman as a character, and I think this movie pretty much perfectly capitalizes on that. You know, it takes the great fatherhood elements as well as brotherhood elements, as well as just family elements, while also talking about those struggles of him having to lead a kingdom. I think this is just a great mix of everything that Aquaman's story could potentially be. It just shoves it all into one movie. At times, it is a little bit too much. I won't lie. At times, I think they do go a little bit too off the rails with the story because it's just convoluted and there's so much shit happening all the time. But on the good side of that, you get a pretty thoughtful story. It doesn't feel like it's a story that doesn't need to be told. Like a lot of these DC movies, I could have gone without seeing these stories, but I think since we have that series of the first Aquaman being pretty great, and then you have Black Manta storyline set up, and then you transition that in the second movie, I think it all comes together pretty well. I'll get back to Black Manta in a second, but my biggest gripe about this movie has to be a lot of the visual effects, and it's not like the big world building stuff, because in general, I think all the 7 kingdoms, Atlantis, everything looks pretty great. But I noticed this in the very beginning of the movie and it was off for the entire film. A lot of the underwater sequences where they do face replacements on like the CGI bodies, it looks really bad. It's like noticeably, disgustingly bad. Even the Flash's face replacements weren't that bad because they just went fully CGI. So everything looked bad, but this you could tell that the faces were filmed for real and then the rest of the body was CGI. And that just really took me out of it. I didn't notice it as much towards the end because at the end they were either going fully CGI or fully live action, which I really liked. But in the very beginning, certain sequences you could really tell what was good and what was bad. It was just very clashing, and it was just a lot of like uncanny valley VFX. But visual effects aside, I think the visuals in general, like the cinematography, shot choices, you know, the fights, choreography, all that kind of stuff, on a craft level, I think this movie is really well made. I think James Wan, it doesn't have as much as a flair of the first Aquaman movie, but I think it still has enough flair for me to really enjoy it. There's this final showdown between Black Manta and Aquaman that I thought was absolutely amazing. They play this like electric guitar soundtrack behind it, which I really liked. And then after that, it kind of gets into a more lore-filled battle, which I also really liked. It was a great balance. But more on Manta, I think Manta is cool in this movie, and in the beginning, it really works. But they kind of do this like weird like entity thing, and I don't want to get too much into it because I didn't really know much going in, but it doesn't really feel like it's that same character from the first film, and it feels like it's so big and like massively world scaled that Manta just doesn't fit the character to be in that villainous position, in my opinion, because in the first movie he was set up to have such a personal problem with Aquaman, and here it just gets too grand for what Black Manta's original character was meant for. Nevertheless, I really enjoyed this movie more than other people, but obviously it does have its problems. Next up on the list is the second newest DCEU movie, Blue Beetle. I think Blue Beetle goes in pretty much like the top of good, right behind Aquaman 2, I would say. I think Blue Beetle has a lot going for it. Obviously, it was originally meant for HBO Max, but I think it does pretty well in theaters. Not financially, obviously, it did not do good at all. But like visually, it holds up to other big comic book films. If anything, it looks better than every other DC movie that came out this year. I think Xolo Maridueña is a perfect addition to this universe, and obviously now that it's coming to a close, I really hope that him, or at least him and as Blue Beetle, get to be in the new universe. I think the rest of the cast is also really great. The biggest problem with this movie, and why I think it just sits right under Aquaman 2, is the villain. Villain is very forgettable. It's just a cliche, really rich lady, and that's okay. You know, it works for this story. It gives us enough time with Xolo Maridueña's character as well as his entire family, and I think the family aspects of this also really work. I actually related to a lot of the elements of this film, which I wasn't really expecting to, but I think it really worked. And then we have Suicide Squad. You guys know where I sit on this one. Every single time I do a ranking, it goes in dead last place. This movie sucks. I don't even want to talk about it. And then we get to Josstice League. This is 2017, I believe, the Josstice League. This one is also going in bad, but right above the Suicide Squad. I think Wonder Woman 1984 is just above this because at least it's a little bit coherent. Justice League just feels like a bunch of slob thrown together. A lot of like just janky VFX thrown together to like put this movie together in the editing room, and then obviously it goes above the Suicide Squad because the Suicide Squad isn't even semi-enjoyable. At least Justice League, like if I was to turn this on for like my little cousin or something, I would be able to bear to sit through. And then we have Zack Snyder's Justice League as well as Justice is Great, because I've seen both of these versions. Starting off with Zack Snyder's Justice League, sadly I'm gonna have to put this in good, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm going to put it below Blue Beetle. And Justice is Gray kind of sits in the same spot. Don't really notice a difference between the two in my personal opinion. I think the black and white just doesn't really do much for the film. Now, I know this is probably my hottest take of the entire video, but Zack Snyder's Justice League does not really sit right with me. I think Zack Snyder, obviously, it's great that he got to have his film released, but it is 4 hours long. 2 hours, way too over how much it should be. There is no need for this movie to be as long as it is. Like, at least cut it down to 3 hours and 20 minutes. I mean, there is no need for a 4-hour runtime. And maybe it's because we already obviously saw, like, a lot of the first act was a big chunk of what the original movie was. And then at the end, it felt like Zack Snyder was just throwing in whatever the hell he wanted, because at this point, his universe isn't going forward. He can just do whatever he wants. It's cool. It's fine. It has great visual effects, but it brings nothing new to the table, really. And on top of that, people are like, oh my god, like, the universe is saved, blah, blah, blah. Like, we have a great iteration of this character. No, we don't. Ben Affleck's Batman is still just as annoyingly, like, monstrous as he used to be. Superman is still boring through his eyes. Wonder Woman is just as good as she was in Wonder Woman 2017. So there was no need for this film, in my personal opinion. Again, I'm glad Zack Snyder got his art out there, but this just doesn't do much for me. Now, before we get into Birds of Prey, I'm gonna just move around the good tier a little bit. I'm gonna put Man of Steel down to top of meh, along with Black Adam and BVS Ultimate Edition. The reason I'm moving these down is because I don't want to have too many things in the good tier, because again, these movies are like very much teetering the line, and I see a few more movies that I like to put in the good tier that aren't really comparable to meh. For example, Birds of Prey. I think Birds of Prey goes just below Zack Snyder's Justice League. Now, my big caveat with Birds of Prey is I've only seen it one time. I feel like most of these movies I've seen more than one time, other than like the bad ones. But Birds of Prey, from what I remember the first time watching it, I actually really enjoyed it. Again, feels like just straight ripped off of a comic book page. I think Harley Quinn is easily one of the best castings done in a comic book movie ever. I think Margot Robbie is perfect in this role. She's so humorous, she's so exciting, and the different versions of her character that we've seen evolve throughout this universe have been great, even in Suicide Squad. I think she's good in the original, but obviously better in the newer version with James Gunn. You know, I think Birds of Prey delivers on the Harley Quinn aspect of it, but again, I think the villain is just a little bit weak, and the ensemble is funny and cool, but just not memorable enough. But next up on the list, we have Shazam. This is going in best of the best, above Aquaman. This first Shazam movie is absolutely awesome. This is one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. I think this film absolutely rips, to be honest. I think the villain is really great. I love the lore, like the Shazam lore in this movie is executed perfectly, and this movie is really heartfelt. Obviously, it is like more of a kid's movie because it starts off with the kids and then kind of gets into the superhero stuff, but it's a kid becoming a superhero. Like, every kid has dreamed of that. And as I've gotten older and rewatched this movie more and more, I feel like I've seen this movie at least like 3 times this year. I absolutely love it. It is so rewatchable. It's so funny. I think Zachary Levi has this great charm to him in the first movie that sadly is just lost in Fury of the Gods, because here you feel like the kid and the adult are the same. You know what I mean? Like, they are both dumb enough to be the same, but in the second movie, I feel like one kind of outweighs the other, and I'll get to that in a second here. But again, what works best about this movie is like that first hour of the film where it just is a kid that gets superpowers. That is so fun, and that's a story that I think is just perfect to tell. Next up, we have Shazam! Fury of the Gods. This one is sadly gonna go at the very top of meh. I think that the biggest problem with this film is, and I mentioned this slightly earlier, is that the kid version of Shazam is way more serious in this movie than the adult version of Shazam, and that's okay, but when you get to emotional moments, when the kid actor is outclassing Zachary Levi as the adult Shazam, there is no reason why I need to be rooting for this movie. Again, the only reason I can defend this movie is because I like how it was set up. I really enjoy chunks of this film. I think the ensemble in this film is absolutely amazing. But when you get to those like personal elements, you get into like the adventure-y aspects of this film, they all kind of fall flat. Like, I could compare this and Aquaman 2 because they're both basically just about this basic adventure to save the world, and it's cool and it's interesting. But looking at Aquaman versus looking at Fury of the Gods, I think Aquaman 2 at least has something that is worth telling for the character. Fury of the Gods seems to be servicing more of characters that aren't Shazam. And so why am I going to a Shazam movie to see all these other characters look cool? I think Athena is absolutely awesome in this movie. Rachel Zegler rips here. She is so great. One of my favorite additions to this universe. But guess what? Why is she one of my favorite parts of the movie when Shazam is one of my least favorite parts of the movie? Then we have another 2023 DCEU movie, The Flash. I'm actually going to put this at the top of meh as well. I was thinking of putting it at the bottom of good, but I won't lie. I think a good chunk of The Flash works thematic. The rest of it, though, doesn't really work at all. I've seen this movie twice, and I will probably never rewatch it. I don't think a lot of this movie it doesn't feel coherent. You know, it's the visual effects is a whole different conversation. It is probably the worst effects ever done in movie history, but the good does look pretty good. but the bad looks atrocious. It's a disappointment to comic book superhero films in general, in my opinion. We're supposed to use these effects and this like capability of technology to bring these movies to another level. And even movies this year that were released, like Quantumania, The Marvels, even Aquaman, the CGI isn't perfect. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it's not amazing, but The Flash is just, it feels like a disservice to people who put their like blood, sweat, and tears into these keyboards to make this movie. But with that being said, my one pro to The Flash and pro to this DC universe in general is the fact that it does truly feel like a comic book story. This story that includes the time travel and multiple Barry Allens, and it just feels like it was ripped out of the comic books, and I can respect that. It does feel like the filmmakers behind this cared about the character, but the craft just didn't match the care, in my opinion. Again, craft and care, they definitely go hand in hand, in my opinion, but you also have to note that The Flash was made in such a bad time in like the whole DC, Warner Brothers, Discovery, Zack Snyder, this whole thing. The Flash is like a product, the baby of all of this drama, and again, it's not the filmmaker's fault, but it is Warner Brothers' fault for still releasing this movie, all the controversy going on around it. There's a lot of bad stuff that associates with this movie. But again, as a comic book fan, it is pretty cool. But as a movie fan, this is the middest of mid. Winding down the list, we have Peacemaker, the only TV show in the DCEU. I'm putting this at best of the best, and honestly, I'm putting it above the first Aquaman movie. I think Shazam just edges it out because it has such a special place in my heart, and I haven't gone back to rewatch Peacemaker, but I absolutely love this show. I won't lie to you guys, I wasn't expecting much from this show. The first DC Universe TV show, James Gunn is directing it, John Cena in the lead. What is going on here? A spin-off from a movie where we thought a character died. What is happening? Long and behold, Peacemaker comes out every single week. It is an emotional roller coaster. This mystery story that turns into this just heartfelt ensemble. I really love everything that this show is about. It is a handful of episodes that all work so well. I wish that DC focused more on TV shows, and that's what I'm excited for in its future. Let me know if you guys want to see a video on my thoughts on the future of the DC Universe and what I think they should do. Let me know in the comments down below because I'd love to make that video. But TV show-wise, this is great. One of my favorite shows from last year. I absolutely love this. The ensemble cast, the direction, the score, the editing, the visuals, the action, just feeling like a comic book once again. DC does it with this show, in my opinion, and again, I wish they did more shows, but Peacemaker, they're 1-for-1, 100% success rate with TV shows in this universe. But finally is The Suicide Squad, and this is going in number 1, the best of the best. Easily, by far, the best project in the DC Extended Universe. One of the greatest comic book films ever made. Obviously, James Gunn is behind this movie, and it shows. This ensemble is perfect. Emotionally, this film is perfect. And visually, it's so fun. It's so unique. It's so expressive. It feels like a comic book brought to life, like the rest of the movies on this tier list, but substance-wise, it still follows through. That's what this universe has been lacking. It's been lacking substance behind these pretty colors, and I think the Suicide Squad cracks the code. Sadly, none of the other movies could for some reason, but the Suicide Squad is the perfect product that the DC Extended Universe made, and the only one. But guys, that wraps up my ranking for the DCEU. It's sad to see this universe go, but I'm excited for the future. Let me know your guys' ranking of all of the DCEU movies in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.